Welcome to the Sleeping Barber podcast.
I don't know, seeing that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is kind of nerve-wracking.
It gets you fired up a little bit, I think.
Well, maybe a little bit, but
race already. 5, 4.
Let's go. It's post-pod time with your favorite host, Marc and V. Is that it?
That's it. I think that's pretty good. I would be happy with that. I am happy with that.
I'm always happy.
Yeah, you are pretty happy. Tell me how happy you were about Tony's conversation.
It was actually, first of all, I was upset that I wasn't actually able to be a part of the conversation. Got really sick, unfortunately, and wasn't in a good state to be talking to anybody that morning, unfortunately. But I love the dialogue. I love the kind of going and digging deeper into the idea of segmentation. Really, how do you define, the needs that or the jobs that need to be, See, this is where we're going to talk about this. Like sometimes I got caught up in a lot of the nuances of language around, the jobs to be done. Specifically. But all in all, man, it was a great podcast. I really enjoyed that. And you did a great job moderating that. So it was great.
Yeah, it was a bit weird. I felt like I was missing my left arm or something without having you there.
I am Mark's left arm.
It was just funny. You get into such a rhythm with two people interviewing, and then all of a sudden you have to do it on your own. Like, wait a sec, where's the other guy?
Wait a sec.
Why am I not hearing a question? Why am I always that? It's weird.
Yeah, man.
Anyway, it was good. Yeah, he was. So there's one thing I thought was really fascinating. I had written a note here. 86% of teams don't agree on what the market need is.
I wrote that down too as well. So it's like we've been doing this a long enough time right now. We're likely writing down the same things. Yeah. What are we doing out there, people? Why can't we agree on some of these fundamental things?
I get it in some ways. Like I worked on a couple products, and it's interesting because the way that you see the market changes from person to person, I think. And unless you are explicit and clear about what the market needs are, you begin to start thinking that your product features are the needs in some ways. Or the product benefits the needs, but you don't necessarily have everyone agreeing about what those are. No, that's fair. Like, I guess why am I surprised? I shouldn't be surprised. It makes sense that it is going to vary from person to person, and this is where you need to make sure you really have really strong data that can help guide some of those thoughts, right? And I think the one thing Tony really articulated really well is how do you make sure that you do have these data sets that allow you to inform, at the end of the day, the jobs to be done. So you talked about the 86% of product teams that don't know how to define the needs. Then he also had the 91% of product teams don't agree. Or sorry, no, you use the 91% right now, right? Yeah, sorry. I think it was 86% of teams don't agree on the market, and 91% of product teams don't agree on what the need is. I might have mixed up the two different descriptions. Yeah.
Which again, for me, was really interesting.
Yeah, totally. And the other one that kind of throws me off is the whole startup playbook around, here's the way we do things. We acquire customers, low cost per acquisition. We look at a calculated lifetime value of X, here's your payback period of Y. And then, scale. So, or hyperscale.
Go.
And so that's interesting because it's like a pretty standard playbook, and yet you have 17% of startups succeed, whereas in his process, the outcome-driven innovation, you have 86%. So there's a pretty substantial gap there in terms of using tools like jobs to be done and outcome-driven innovation to improve business outcomes. And I think some of it starts with just the agreement and the alignment on what the market is and what the needs are.
You just said something that triggered a thought. In the podcast, he talked about how it wasn't originally called Jobs to be Done. it was for him, it was outcomes driven. It's innovation essentially. So I thought that was interesting that it ended up being defined as something entirely different because of Christensen. I don't remember
Clay Christensen, the milkshake. Christensen.
Yeah, exactly. But anyways, I think though when we go back to the framework is very simple, right? So like he continuously kind of talked about two things that you need to do first. First of all, you need to define what your market is. And then second, define the needs of that market. And that help essentially defines your segmentation, right? Mm-hmm. He was suggesting that sometimes those two things are somewhat used interchangeably a little bit, but they are still fundamentally two things. So under the market first is understand the needs of the market, what needs are not being met, and then group people trying to get a job done. So that's like the three things. And then on defining the needs of the market itself is group people with unmet needs. That informs your segmentation. So I thought it was really interesting kind of looking at that through that lens and say, okay, these are the first two things that we really have to do. And that then again, essentially should help, push people down that right path and say, okay, what is our product actually doing? And I loved your push on the, you don't need a 1/4 inch bit. You want to create a 1/4 inch hole. And that's in essence, it's the jobs to be done framework, or the mindset is like finding solutions for that hole that you want to create, not the bit that you need.
Yeah. And I think that's going back to the product features thing. Like you have a product, let's say a drill bit, and it can create a 1/4 inch hole. And so you think that the 1/4 inch hole is maybe the thing. But there's also like, what I like about this is you get locked into this idea that a market segment is an industry vertical, like I don't know, oil and gas, or
totally
men 25 to 64, the demographic, behavioral, psychographic, like that kind of market segmentation.
Yeah,
and it's so much more nuanced than that. And I think that's part of the thing that's fascinating about this to me is that we've talked about this before, when you're building market segments, you should have individual people in each segment, and they shouldn't be in multiple segments. And that's how you know when things are right. But his point of view is that's not true, because their needs of a 1/4 inch hole could come from any segment. Could be man, could be woman, could be like a 18-year-old, could be a 36-year-old.
Totally.
Could be somebody in oil and gas, could be somebody in quick service restaurants. And you can be in that need in one moment, and you could have another need state, another segment, different moment. And so, and then there's also all kinds of people that have different needs or that are using different solutions. Like we talked about satisficing a lot.
Yeah.
Like the idea that I can use a drill bit to do that, but I can also use a fork in theory. I could use a screwdriver. Like there's all kinds of things I can use, and I will use, because I'm trying to fix this, and it may not be a well-met solution, but
totally.
Yeah, it's so interesting just reframing how people actually do stuff, and they're trying to get a job done.
Yeah.
And thinking about a market that way, as opposed to just being like, those standardized industry verticals or psychographic, demographic verticals.
Yeah. And it's all a part of segmentation. I guess you can look at it, it is, there is value, but I think in his point, he says like individuals can be in different segments of markets at different times as well. So because of that, if you are going down the psychographic demographic side, you may be missing an entire opportunity of the overlap or the constant shifting that consumers are doing in and out of these spaces. And I feel like this framework is a lot more fluid than a lot more of the traditional segmentation analysis that exist.
Yeah. And the more the needs are met within a segment, the harder it is to sell.
Totally. Yeah.
It's interesting.
if you think about that, you're right. I don't think that really dawned on me though, as before the conversation, but now coming after listening to your conversation with Tony, like you're like, oh my goodness, wait a second here. I don't know. We'll talk about the bananas in a bit. I don't want to burn that matchstick yet, because I think that was a really interesting take as well. But all I'm trying to say is when you think about the fluidity in markets, you have to step away from a traditional segmentation, which includes like the demographics, psychographics, etc. You have to really orient it against something like a jobs to be done, because then it probably, and you talked about it in the episode, like you can reposition existing products for those various jobs to be doing. Because you may have created the product to do something entirely different, but then there's a use case out there that's like, people are using it, your product to do something different as well. But define the jobs to be done is probably the most important aspect for any new product going to market.
Yeah, and you hinted on that with the banana thing, but there's it's not exclusive to brand new, highly innovative, disruptive technologies, right? Like we're talking about a banana, and he was hired to figure out ways to sell more bananas, which is through like a product feature that it had, or the connecting a product feature to a relatively unmet need of, I think the unmet need was sleep aids that weren't medical or pharmaceutical.
Yeah. I don't remember the actual, what the, oh my goodness, not the ingredient. Anyways, there's something in a banana.
Tryptophan or something like this. This is the same thing that was in turkey, I think.
Yeah. Which suggests that it can help with sleeping. So, that was an unmet need. It was an underserved need in the market. So their take was, hey, why don't we look at that as an opportunity to expand, your product to, even though I think Chiquita decided that, we want to be known for giving you energy. We want to be known for, vitality, not putting people to sleep. So that's a fair play as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Tryptophan. That's what it was.
Tryptophan? Okay. There you go.
So it converts into serotonin and melatonin. So melatonin is like that little pill that people take when they're like a naturopathic remedy to try and go to sleep.
Right. I don't know. I've never had a problem sleeping, man. I
don't have a problem going to sleep. I just have a problem staying asleep.
Okay.
I'm that guy who wakes up at like 3 a.m, then 5 a.m. And I'm like, well, I'm up. I should probably have bananas at that point.
Have a banana, man.
That's a good point. Now I'm going to start thinking about that. I just like, there's so much about, I think I can't remember if I talked about this in this podcast or not, but just the idea of invisible hand, like this idea keeps coming back to me where
you did.
Absolutely. Because of the way that we think about how segmentation should work, we then start thinking about this like process that naturally falls into place around segmentation, which then leads to targeting, which then leads to positioning. And then you look at your, if you go to their 4 Ps at that point, then your product features and, your benefits and all that kind of stuff. And so that leads you down a path of the way you execute a business. But just as valid is a different form of segmentation, which is this jobs to be done process. Totally. And outcome-driven innovation, which leads you down an entirely different path.
Totally.
It's so fascinating how like these models kind of shape our thoughts and our behaviors around what's effective, what's not effective, what's the right way to do things. And I keep coming back to that stat around the percentage of startups that succeed. I'm like, why wouldn't we look at something more that has even the remotest chance of giving you a competitive advantage?
He said one thing, and I put a box around it as well. You have to really reconsider and think like, what does a customer see when they're trying to get a job done?
Right.
And I think that phrase in of itself really, for me, personifies what jobs to be done actually is. But it's also taking a different lens and saying, let's see the problem through the lens of the consumer.
Totally.
and really define what that is. And then let's see how our products or even our current products can actually cater to that. Or do we need to innovate? Do we need to change something? Do we need to come up with something else? I think that for me is such a, if we constantly talk about customer centricity, well, here's an example of that, a very tangible example of saying, this is how we can inform product roadmaps right now, because we're looking at a problem through the lens of a consumer versus just how we perceive the problem, because we've already created a product that helps do some part of it, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I don't know why I keep thinking about expenses. I just had to do some recently, but like,
Did you doing expenses again, Mark?
My wife is doing my taxes, and I literally handed her an envelope of receipts.
There you go, honey. Was it under the table?
She's an accountant. So I'm like, but that's like, an envelope is a legitimate way of collating all of my expenses from last year.
That's true.
She's not very satisfied with that, I guarantee. But that's what I did. And then we had my daughter convert all those expenses into an Excel file. So she got some money for that. She got paid to do that.
Amazing.
She was very excited. And then, but this year I started using Wave. And so Wave accounting software, you can use your camera to take a photo of the expense, and then it converts it into like a digital record.
Yeah.
And so it'll almost automatically do that. And there's a whole bunch of other tools that are out there that are kind of like that and that could do the same kind of thing. But yeah, like those are legitimate ways of me as a consumer, like an envelope, shoebox, my daughter, Excel spreadsheet, Wave, all these kinds of things.
Totally. That
are very valid ways of me having done this. And I think, when you think about market expansion, and there's a huge percentage of people that are just using envelopes and shoeboxes.
We use an envelope.
Yeah. For taxes.
It's just the easiest. Yeah.
Yeah.
For some reason in our heads, it's easy because it's like, I know this is something that I can claim at the end of the year. I'm going to put in this magical envelope that we always know where it is. It's very simple.
Mm-hmm.
We should probably digitize things, but we don't.
Yeah. Yeah. So like to your point though, going back to the customer centricity, like it's you could easily say, like, if you're Wave, well, our competitor is QuickBooks, our competitor is whatever the other apps are. Yeah. But you don't always necessarily think of your competitor being Excel or my daughter that's hand bombing receipts into piles and then putting those in Excel, or just an envelope.
Yeah.
But it's like, I think that's where so much opportunity comes from, by thinking about what the consumer is doing. Not to say I'm a perfect consumer example, but it's just an example.
Yeah, it's how a consumer perceives a problem that they're trying to solve. Because I think, like, we get caught up organizationally thinking that, we've defined a product that helps meet a need, and maybe it's very true up to a certain point.
Right.
But if we haven't done the analysis on the problem that's actually solving and all the things around it, and the way, like you said earlier, you can punch a quarter-inch hole multiple ways. You can just jab a screwdriver through drywall. There's your quarter-inch hole. Well, if it's wood, well, that's going to be a little more difficult to do. So you're going to have to think of another tool, right? So I think naturally as consumers, we're always going to be troubleshooting as much as possible. But even if we go back to some of the conversations we've had with Roger, I know this hasn't aired yet, but with Ari as well, the idea of making it as frictionless as possible is the key here. So, like, if you haven't spent enough time understanding the problem through the lens of the consumer, your product's going to probably fall short at some point.
Totally. Yeah. Or that's a huge opportunity if you've already got it out. And anyway, it's an interesting conversation and an interesting model to reframe how you think about the market in general, and a really good point around having agreement on what the market is like.
Totally.
Like, some of our biggest problems are not going to market. It's understanding the market.
It's understanding the market. I also loved this is the one last thing I wanted to kind of call to quickly. Excuse me, was category entry points versus jobs to be done.
Oh yeah,
I thought that was getting his perspective on that. I thought was really interesting, because I think you and I would naturally use category entry points as a way of defining, just kind of ways to reposition a product or look at the product in totality. Mm-hmm. But I love that he kind of articulated through the lens of category entry points are more circumstances that can lead to jobs to be done. So he sees it almost as the precursor to it, which I thought was, I think it's a very valid point when you're comparing the two. Just wanted to call that out as well, because I thought
that's a good point. Yeah, that is a good point, because I've been somewhat confused about like the difference between. I know they're different, but I just wasn't sure what the differences were. It was interesting getting his take on that for sure.
I would have thought the category entry points would have came after. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, if we're doing a jobs to be done, we've defined what the jobs to be done is. Great. It's going to spit out essentially category entry points for that job. The way he talked about it is like, no, the category entry points are a set of circumstances that inform the jobs to be done. So it was really, it totally changed the way I saw it, to be honest with you. But just really fascinating stuff.
Yeah. Okay, V. Well, this was great. I'm glad we got to do this again. Yeah. I know you weren't part of the original conversation, but it's always awesome having you on this. I love doing this part.
Yeah, man, me too. This is also great.
We've got a couple of really good podcasts. I'm super excited. I mean, we always say this all the time, but I'm really excited about a lot of the guests we've got coming up in the next little while. Including a big conversation around physical availability. So that should be that'll be a
juicy one. That's a juicy one.
Okay, buddy. We'll talk to you soon. Until next time.
Go chase Puffy.
I'm totally butchering this.
That's okay. I don't know if the last post pod we did, we literally said it at the exact same time.
At the same time. I know.
That was incredible.
It was really good. We got to work on our time.
This is great, man.
Okay. We'll talk to you soon, buddy.
All right. Have a good one.